I'm good now. All right, so today I want to talk about Pipenv. The concept of package management in Python has not necessarily had a great history. Nowadays, we've got two really good options. A lot of people absolutely love to use poetry, and there's a lot of love for it in the community, but I've had great success with Pipenv. It had kind of a rocky start, and so I know a lot of people haven't been willing to go back to it, but it has been given a lot of love and attention over the past couple of years. And I want to share the joy that I've had using it with you guys. And this is kind of where Python is coming from. This is a great XKCD comic showing how messed up Python packaging has been in the past. You can end up with all sorts of different OS installations and Anaconda installations, and you get installations through Homebrew and Python.org, and it can create a huge mess on your computer. I have switched to using Pipenv for basically everything. I get my binaries from Python.org, install Python, and then I use Pipenv to create my virtual environments that I run all of my different applications. So what is it? It's basically just a combination of pip and venv with a little bit of extra just to make it a little bit smoother of a process, a little bit more secure of a process, and a little bit more repeatable between different systems. So my favorite thing from it is the reproducible environments, because you can install from the pip_file.lock. So you end up with two pip files, a pip file, which is your nice, simple looking file, and then your pip_file.lock. Your pip_file.lock is not meant really for human consumption. You're not meant to change anything in it. But the pip file itself, that's where you can go and look at what everything is. But when it does the installations, you can do the installations from the pip_file.lock, and it will pin all your versions of what you're using. So if you install on your machine and then your coworker pulls down the same repo, installs on their machine, you guys are going to be using the same version of everything, because it hashes the versions, which gives you your increased security, and it is just nice and easy to use. Well, a lot of people also will suggest poetry. It's great too. I'm not saying don't use poetry. I'm just saying I haven't had as good of an experience with poetry, but my needs are also a little bit different. I would definitely suggest using poetry if you want to publish to PyPI, because it is great for that publishing aspect of creating a package and then sharing it with the community. I'm not doing that with any of my work right now, so that's not a benefit for me. So the simplicity of Pipenv is more than enough for me. I've been using it both locally on my machine and in production for several years. It has been perfectly smooth, except for one small exception when I had a problem installing PsychoPG2. That's the only problem I've ever had with Pipenv. Poetry, I had a lot more problems. I don't know if that was just me and my team, we didn't mesh well with poetry, whereas Pipenv has been perfect for us. So when you go to install it, you can either just pip install it, or you can use pipx. I highly recommend using pipx. It's the recommended way of installing it. And pipx is another Python package that is used to isolate command line tools that you want to be globally available. So if you want to install the AWS CLI, if you want to install something that you're going to be using across the board all the time and you always want it available, install it versus using pipx. It gives you an isolated sandbox for that one single command line tool, but makes it globally available. So you do pip install pipx, and then pipx install pipenv, and you're ready to go. Once you have it available, then the commands are super simple, and they really mimic pip very closely most of the time. There's a few extra things that you have just because it is combining both pip and venv also, and then there's a little bit more that it does. So when you want to create a new empty environment, you just run pipenv install, and it creates a new environment for you to work in. Or if you have a pip file that comes from like a coworker or someone else because you're collaborating on a project, if that pip file is in the same directory as where you're at or in one that's above where you're at, and you do pipenv install, it'll create that virtual environment from that pip file. When you're creating an environment, you can also pass in packages that you want right from the beginning. So if you know that you're going to be using Flask, you can just run pip install Flask. It'll create your virtual environment and install Flask all at the same time. When you go to add a package, it's the same. It's just pipenv install, and you give the package name, and you just treat it like as if it was pip, and it puts everything into your virtual environment all the time, whether or not you're actually in the environment itself. So to access the environment, there's two common ways that you're going to do that. You're either going to run pipenv shell, and it's going to just drop you into a new shell that has that environment active. So if you run pipenv shell, you're in the command line prompt, you type Python, it's going to give you Python for whatever environment that you're in. When you're done and you want to leave, type exit, and it leaves the environment. You can also, if you want to just run like a single command in that environment, you don't necessarily want to drop into the shell, you can do pipenv run and then give the path to the script that you're wanting to run, and off it goes. So if you were trying to run a Flask server, you could just do pipenv Flask run server, and off it goes. I've been using it in production. It's been really nice working in production. It doesn't really get in your way. You can do things like do system installs with pipenv. So if you don't necessarily want that virtual environment and you want it to install inside of Docker, or if you're running in Heroku, you can do a system install, and then it basically is doing the same thing as if you were taking and doing a pip install from a requirements.txt to your system. You can use the deploy command so that it will fail if your lock file is out of date. And this increases security so that whatever you're installing on your server for a production environment, you know it is the ones that you have pinned in your lock to running. Whereas if you don't run the deploy command with it, then it's going to possibly update to just the newest version of whatever you are running. So you can get more information at this URL. I'm sure that we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. I will get that to whoever is sharing them out. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to hit me up. If you have any right now, I'd be more than happy to take questions.
Hey man, awesome talk. So like the key distinction here for pipenv and just using like a regular virtual environment is that global distinction. Like these are the settings you want to apply globally.
So this is the same as like just managing with venv. So if you wanted to create a virtual environment with venv, this is doing the same thing as that. And so for every project, it'll have its own virtual environment.
And so the benefit is you can run just like the one line and you have it done, right? You don't have to then, oh, got it. Cool. Very cool.
And it also gives you just a little bit more reproducibility. It is supposed to do a little bit more with managing dependencies. So if there are dependency conflicts between two libraries that you've installed, it tries to find the best thing that sorts out that conflict. There is some more magic going on behind the scenes that you don't get just with pip.
How have you found the upgrade like workflow? So if I have Django 3.1 and I want to upgrade to Django 3.2 with the entry points that Pipenv provides, like how do you kind of tell it, okay, now it's safe to actually install a different version of this package?
So if you don't want it automatically doing the upgrades for you, you can specify the version, and then when you want to upgrade it, you can just explicitly just say, install this version, and then it will do the upgrade for you.
Cool. So then there's a separate kind of upgrade indication that's like if you haven't pinned like a primary dependency, it will like figure out the dependency graph and install those? Or...
Yes. So like most of the time when I'm doing like my development work, if I'm not worried about having any versions pinned, I'll just do pip install Flask, and it will do Flask equals star, and then it will just keep the most up-to-date version of Flask for me all the time. Now, behind the scenes in the lock file, it is explicitly saying which one was installed, so that if I then deploy to a server and I'm saying I want it to match what was most recent, and I do that deploy flag, it will install and make sure that the lock file is in sync with what is being installed. And so that will give you the ability to make sure that like on your server, things aren't changing unless you explicitly let it change.
With pip, I'm used to a workflow where I'll freeze pip into a requirements.txt and post that in the repository. And so people I'm collaborating with install out of that into their own. Is that a similar workflow, or are you pushing the lock file into Git?
So you push two files, the pip file and the pip file.lock. Both of those get pushed into your repository, and they work together. And you normally don't manually edit either. If you are going to manually edit one, it is going to be the pip file. But those are automatically created and updated as you just do pip file install whatever.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, it sounds like if you, like in that traditional workflow, right, you do pip freeze, that ties you to a version, but this kind of gets around that with that lock file when you deploy to a server. But in your like development environment, your requirements.txt wouldn't be frozen to a particular version, right? So this pipenv would automatically find the latest and then save that version of the lock file when you deploy to production.
Yeah.
Very cool.
One other side benefit of what like Pipenv and Poetry offer is that you're tracking your primary dependencies separate from your transit dependencies, right? So if you install Flask, you're pulling down like Workzoid and a few other like packages around things that you probably want to, they aren't really dependencies of your application. So you don't necessarily need to look at those. And so when you pip freeze on a big project, it can be overwhelming. So knowing like what you actually depend on is a great kind of asset that these tools provide.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thanks for calling that out.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm gonna stop the first recording.